Good. Welcome, everyone. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except committee co-chairs Sarah and Sandrea and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public that wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon and pressing raise hand and not the wave or thumbs up button. And only press it once, because if you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. And note that the chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems and not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They won't be able to see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. And finally, please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see.
Thank you, Max. Okay, so greetings all and welcome to our Social Justice Committee meeting on today. And we are having a presentation by Mr. Naveed, Deputy Director of the New York City Office for Prevention of Hate Crimes. We're all looking forward to this presentation. So we're gonna let him take it away.
Sure,
The
and
floor is
let me,
yours.
you now are able to share screen as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. So let's just see if this works here. When I go to the next slide, does you see the next slide?
Today's agenda.
Yeah.
Oh,
perfect.
and now about, yep.
Awesome. We were having some technical difficulties before, and I just wanted to make sure because I literally went through a presentation and only the first slide was showing for like the first 5 minutes. But anyways, folks, hello, thank you so much for joining, inviting us here today. My name is Hassan Naveed. I am the Deputy Executive Director for the New York City Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you all today and give you information about our office, who we are, what we do, and some of the stuff that has been going on, providing some context about it as well too. So we're going to go over about OPHC, what is a hate crime. That's sort of our agenda for today. There is a lot more nuance than what's on here, so just be prepared. And I welcome questions during the course of this as well, unless folks want to hold their questions until the end. So, the New York City Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. Who are we? We are only 19 months old. The office itself came about through legislation in February 2019 by City Council. And a lot of this was because there was an increasing number of hate crimes impacting a number of communities. And the City Council, as well as the mayor, felt that it was important for them to be able to open an office that primarily focuses on efforts of prevention of hate crimes and response. Now, the office was slated to actually open in the later year of 2019, but we saw the horrendous anti-Semitic incidents take place at the end of 2019 into early 2020. With the situation in Muncie, we saw, and so we knew that the importance of this office in opening up sooner was essential. And so the office opened up in 2019. And so OPHC is not a law enforcement entity. We don't investigate hate crimes. We don't investigate bias incidents, right? We are an entity itself, an office within the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice that focuses on non-law enforcement deterrence efforts. Ways that we can stop, prevent hate through the course of public education, outreach, community safety models. That means working with communities to be able to define what safety looks like for them, coming up with those strategic approaches to safety, and then also preventative best practices that we'll go over a little bit later on. And this is all, of course, to ensure that the most vulnerable folks in our city remain safe from hate crimes. And so how does OPHC go about doing its work? And there are 3 pillars that really end up driving the efforts of what we're doing, right? And each of these 3 pillars have programs, they have various different resources available. And so the first thing, of course, is education. Education is one of the most important things to be able to combat hate. And our educational initiative itself goes all the way from young students right? In public schools here, all the way to us providing these trainings to folks and other such information to nonprofits, community organizations on the stuff that's happening. I'll give you an example. During the course of the anti-Semitic incidents that we had happen in late 2019, early 2020, many of the students who were at our public schools were asking the question, what's happening? What's going on? What is this, right? And so our efforts in working with the Department of Education and producing information materials will best ensure that we can end up providing information to those students and for the teachers to be able to have the skill, to be able to have the know-how, and how to be able to have those conversations of some of the most horrific incidents we saw. Through the course of the anti-Asian or the Asian hate crime incidents, we did something similar as well, right? We found that the issue of public health and vulnerable populations and hate crimes is an intersection that we've seen before historically, right? And it's something that we've seen impact some of the most vulnerable communities within Asian communities. And so for us to put a resource together in really educating many of our youth out there was extremely important. We've also done other types of educational initiatives. We've done a comic book competition. We've done art competitions. We engage regularly with the youth leadership councils for the city. Each city agency has one. And one of the most important things that we're working on, I think everything is important, but this is sort of what's been mandated to us by law, is that we're required to produce hate crime educational curriculum for the schools in New York City, as well as the various different educational programs that exist. Of course, we don't have anything at the moment that provides the details or the information about what a hate crime is, how it's impacted communities, what it looks like historically in New York City, what are some of the trends that are going on. We want to be able to get this information to everybody in the city. So this curriculum is currently being developed. We hope that it will be something that will be online and interactive for people to use as well. And we continually work and engage with other city agencies and community organizations to be able to amplify and build capacity as being a tool to fight hate. Another aspect, of course, is community relations. It's very important for us to be able to work with community and work with allies of people who are victims of hate crimes and really understand the community's perspectives and how we can go about addressing some of these issues of hate and bias, right? And so we have something called the Community Advisory Services Team. These organizations really provide us with advisory services, like advisory and service provision for folks who are victims of hate crimes, right? And at the same time, these are people who are involved in organizations and really providing us with a direction on how we can best meet the needs of those communities on the ground. And some of the issues that are trending, because we know that there are communities out there that would prefer to end up going to some of these organizations here first because they speak their language, because there's cultural competency there, whatever it might be. And of course, we look to them for their experience, their expertise, and also some of their services for communities as well. We work with these organizations to put on town halls. Last year, we had a numerous amount of town halls, just hearing concerns from communities and coming up with a joint strategy on how we can fight hate. We had town halls in Mandarin. We had town halls in Cantonese, in Korean, in Japanese, whatever we can do to be able to meet those populations that are affected by the current crisis that we're seeing right now. And of course, all of these stakeholders are committed collectively, and they're united, of course. When an incident does happen, all of these folks are informed about the incident itself, and the support that's poured in between communities is something that's absolutely amazing, right? It's interesting because we don't have such a advisory board like this in other parts of the city. This is the first of its kind that brings Muslims, the LGBTQ community, the Jewish community, immigrant communities, API communities, anything that you can imagine to the table to have a conversation about. We can make our city stronger, united. And then our third pillar is laws and law enforcement. It's essential for us to work with the NYPD, with the district attorney's office, and really ensuring that the coordination that's happening in hate crime response, right, response to hate crimes, as well as preventative efforts, is something that, of course, the law enforcement is involved as needed, right? There are times that communities want to have community-led conversations, and then there are times that communities want NYPD's hate crime task force or NYPD's Asian hate crime task force to be able to provide a security briefing, for example, or other sorts of information, right? And it's also important for us our office to be that sort of bridge between law enforcement and those community organizations, as well as communities, to be able to ensure that we're providing consistent coordination. One sort of aspect, one program or initiative that we do within this laws and law enforcement thing is that we end up sending out a notification as to when a violent hate crime occurs to various stakeholders. And so let me go into a little bit of detail about that. So when the NYPD determines that something's considered a violent hate crime, they report it to our office, and then our office ends up issuing an alert. That alert is then shared to elected and legislative officials in the jurisdiction where the violent hate crime has occurred. Additionally, we also ensure that community organizations that you saw on the CAST list before, the service providers, citywide or borough-focused, even community organizations that may not have services but provide victim advocacy or provide community advocacy, that they're all informed. And of course, we want the community boards to know as well. And so the community boards also receive that notification as well. That notification includes information on the incident. Of course, we're really sensitive to ensuring that we're not compromising any confidentiality or any integrity of any investigation. And we're coordinating response, OPHC, with law enforcement as well as with communities to ensure that whatever resources, services, or concerns are addressed. And so this is something that ends up coming out. We probably have done 30 in so far, but it has to be something that's considered a violent hate crime. So those are particular categories. And NYPD has to deem it as such. And through the course of this process as well, when we're looking at laws and laws enforcement, we're also looking at ways to promote restorative justice approaches to hate crime offenses, as well as restorative justice principles, right? We've, in the past, worked with communities who have desired a restorative justice outcome, right? With victims who've desired a restorative justice outcome. And that is something that's an extremely powerful decision that survivors and victims are making, that instead of having the individual who's committed the offense go through the criminal justice process, what's happened is that there's been a discussion between the survivor victim as well as the person who's committed the offense and the necessary parties to come up with a resolution that would end up addressing the harm that's been created there, right? And of course, this is something that is extremely victim-centric. I just want to clarify that. And that whether it's going to be taking classes, whether it's going to be about the particular community issue, right? Or it's going to be something that involves volunteering at a community organization, or writing a letter, or attending a course, a cultural competency course by one of our community organizations in that area. Those are all the options that are available and more, but that's really left up to the victim as well to be able to make the decision of what that repair looks like to that harm itself. And so those are our principles, sorry, our sort of our pillars, right? But at the same time, beyond that, administratively, we play an important role in coordinating, as you can tell, in those other areas, but also with city agencies too. We have over 60 city agencies across this country, across this city, and we engage with 30 of them here, right? And so this includes the Department of Education. All the educational materials that's being produced are vetted, are gone through the DOE. Of course, we have subject matter experts there as well, right? We look at stuff like the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit that regularly engages with community leaders from each community, right? That provides us with important subject matter expertise on how we can work with those communities. We have, of course, the New York City Commission on Human Rights that works on bias incidents itself, and we'll go over that shortly. As well as the Taxi Limousine Commission. Some folks might ask, well, why would the TLC be involved in that, right? And there's actually information and data out there that gives us an idea of how, for example, TLC captures, violence between that may occur between the passenger and the driver, the passenger onto the driver. And so we look at analysis in terms of seeing who's been more affected in those situations to see whether there is a trend there, right? And if there is a trend there, how do we seek to address that? And we have all the DA's offices and the NYPD on that. And so we meet on a quarterly basis and to be able to discuss a variety of issues. Now, there are 5 working groups within this interagency committee that do work through the course of the year and report to us on a quarterly basis. We focus, as I said earlier, youth education is one of our working groups. The neighborhood safety and community relations. You can see how this sort of lines up with our pillars because we want to be able to ensure that there is consistency and that we're also bringing all the stakeholders to these working groups. This is interagency, but also the community ones as well. Victim support, restorative justice, strategies to enhance incident reporting. Each of these working groups are poised to be able to improve and enhance the city's response, as well as its preventative efforts to hate crimes, right? And so we know that we have, there's always ways for us to be able to improve, right? And so the Restorative Justice Working Group, for example, is working with the necessary stakeholders in the interagency committee with all these city agencies, as well as community organizations to be able to figure out what restorative justice programming would look like in this area. That also goes for youth education, right? We have a lot of youth development programs across the city. So we include DOE, we include the Department of Youth and Community Development, that all these entities itself to be able to figure out what's the best way for us to deliver what the material should look like, how it should be delivered, who should do it, all this sort of stuff to ensure that we're really providing for some outreach education that's effective. So this goes to, well, what is a hate crime, right? And so we can just go back to the basic definition of the law itself. A hate crime is a personal or property-based offense that is motivated in whole or substantial part by bias towards a person's, a group's, or a place's perceived or actual identification with a particular identity. Now, hate crimes are subjected to enhanced penalties if they're prosecuted in that particular way because they do have a greater impact. What is the greater impact to hate crimes, right? Well, it's clear that they send a message to, of course, the hate crime survivor, but also to the communities that are impacted. For about 4 years, I lived in DC and I led an LGBTQ organization that really worked on the issues of hate crimes. And to see, and many of us can probably connect to this in just the communities that we come from, to see someone who's been attacked that shares similar identity as yourself or as ourselves, whatever it might be, really does have this effect that ends up impacting communities overall, right? And I saw that in the community that I worked with. If you all recall, we saw what happened in Muncie, the unfortunate situation that occurred in 2020, and we saw that it impacted, of course, the Jewish community in Muncie. But the reality of it also was that there were a lot of children here in New York City from the Jewish community that we engaged with at that time who were very concerned, who were very worried, who were very scared. And so how do we go about ensuring that we address that impact that happens on the community, and that goes towards our support victim services? We want to make sure that there's mental health services, other stuff by folks who are being impacted by that level of effect of a hate crime, right? And so we did obviously engaged with an entity called Safe Horizon. Safe Horizon is one of the largest service providers in the city that, of course, ended up providing counseling services for children there. Also, another thing is hate crimes, are something that a person can be targeted because of multiple aspects of their identity, right? A person is not just their gender, but they're also their ethnicity, their religion. And those are things that end up intersecting as to where, someone could be attacked because they're an Asian woman, right? Particularly. It could be attacked because, they're a gay Muslim, for example, right? That sort of intersectionality is something that we acknowledge, and that's something that does exist. So what are some of the protected classes that we've talked about? What are some of those sort of protected categories in which a hate crime is a crime motivated by these areas? And that includes race and color, national origin and ancestry, gender and gender identity or expression, sex orientation, religion, religious practice, age, and disability. So New York City is blessed to have some pretty strong laws when it comes to hate crimes, as well as a commitment to being able to ensure that we're addressing it in a way where an office like ours exists. We're young, but we hit the ground running as soon as we were put into play, right? And so these are the various different laws that folks always ask me what are some of the laws that bring it out. But I think the ones here that really speak to the city ones are the ones that we've, of course, created our office, and then also ensures that communities themselves, through Local Law 49, through our notification system, know what's happening in real time and as needed. So I want to go over some hate crime in New York City hate crime data, just generally. This is unfortunately not the most updated, but I'm going to provide some context and provide some updated information for folks as well too. So just to give people perspective, a hate crime complaint is an allegation of a hate crime reported to the NYPD without necessarily having identified a suspect to arrest. Now we're going to talk about what a bias incident is later on. That's a bit different than a hate crime, but this is a hate crime complaint, and it's something that NYPD handles, right? And the DAs, of course. So from 2018 to 2019, we saw an increase of hate crime complaints by 19%. The majority of the complaints were anti-Jewish, 76% of which were for incidents of property vandalism hate crimes. That means 76% of them likely were related to a synagogue being tagged with the swastika or other sorts of hate symbols that that occurred at that time, right? In 2019 to 2020, we saw a decrease in the number of hate crime complaints. And so with data, I always caution people to really think of data as more of a snapshot of something than it is providing you with the depth of the issue itself. And the reason why is because what happened last year? We had a pandemic, and the pandemic really drove crime down across the board, right? But also a lot less people were out in public spaces, right? A lot less folks were engaging with each other. And so although we saw a decrease, that doesn't necessarily mean that there was an overall decrease overall. We just saw a decrease in complaints being reported to the NYPD. But however, we did see a new type of hate crime. It was sort of a COVID-related hate crime that primarily targeted Asian communities, and the majority of them were violent. And that was something that gave rise to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. I do want to say that as of today, compared to last year, we are still looking at an increase in COVID-related hate crimes that primarily target Asian communities, or anti-Asian crimes, or hate crimes against Asians. And it's been something that's been trending. Obviously, you've seen this through the course of across the country. I believe, and I say this, I believe, and I want to caution, the number has not been finalized yet, and it should be soon, right? Is that we're at 39 as of today in terms of in terms of hate crimes against Asian New Yorkers or AAPI communities. However, and I always say this again, you know, when we're looking at data, we have to acknowledge the limitations. Data itself is not something that's perfect. So what does it mean? What is the limitation when it comes to crime data or hate crime data? Underreporting is a systemic issue that impacts hate crime bias incident data. And a lot of it is driven by language access barriers, as well as potentially uneasy relationship with law enforcement and vulnerable populations. And so if you look at underreporting a bit more, right, we're seeing that according to the city's Commission on Human Rights, which did this study back in the day that looked on a survey of bias, discrimination, and acts of hate, 71% of people in some vulnerable groups do not report hate-motivated incidents and harassment. Well, why? Why wouldn't they report it if they've been victimized from it, right? Well, some believe that the incident was not significant enough to report to police, right? Some are concerned about immigration status. Some are concerned about outing themselves. When I led the LGBTQ group, you know, I worked with folks who were afraid of being outed after leaving a gay bar or whatever it might be, right? And also there could just be, if you're undocumented and that status, and you're afraid to be able to engage with police, that's understandably so, right? And there's also, of course, you know, we're looking at police and community relations right now as being, you know, of course, a national conversation, but it does affect vulnerable and underrepresented communities reporting of hate crimes, as well as crime complaints overall. And so to further sort of illustrate the point beyond our local data, more than half of all hate crimes committed between 2004 and 2015 were not reported to law enforcement. And that's according to the US Bureau of Justice Statistics. So what we're seeing is a snapshot. What's happening could be a lot more than what we're seeing. I think it's always important to keep that in mind, that the issue could be a lot more, there's a lot more depth to it than just, you know, the numbers atop. So now we look into bias incidents that, you know, are different, right, than hate crimes and how they're handled. A bias incident is an act of prejudice that is not a crime. It does not involve violence, threats, or property damage, right? And so the example that's provided here is a restaurant owner telling a Jewish customer that right there, right? And so while they can't violate criminal laws, right, bias incidents can still violate civil laws. And so here, the Commission on Human Rights handles this discriminatory harassment, right? Discriminatory harassment, and we encourage folks to call 311 when they do face this discriminatory harassment. So we get a lot of questions about the confusion between a hate crime and a bias incident. You know, I've provided both definitions. It still doesn't help me, but let's look at some examples actually, if you don't mind, because it might be helpful to provide something, right? And so we look at the first bullet point here about a passenger on a train who says that and threatens violence on a same-sex couple holding hands. So there's a threat there, right? And so that is something that is a violent threat, that is a hate crime, right? That could be something that ends up, that would be something NYPD would handle, right? And so now we look at a group of teenagers who spray a swastika on a building or hang a noose from a tree. Now, there's a separate law that exists in New York City that sort of provides a bit more of enhancement to the hate crime laws that says that wherever there's a swastika painted or graffitied on, or a hate symbol, or a noose being hanged, it's automatically a hate crime. And we look at someone who walks by a Latinx person on the street and yells, I hate Mexicans and go back to your country. This is a bias incident. It's discriminatory harassment, right? A group of teenagers call a Black teenager the N-word, for example. That is something that is also a bias incident that CCHR, the Commission on Human Rights, would handle, right? a passerby spits in someone's face and yells, yells that. Since there was spitting in the face, that would be something of an assault, and it would be something that NYPD would handle. And lastly, a restaurant owner tells an entering Sikh customer in a turban, Muslims are not welcomed here. Of course, that's discrimination. And so that would be something that would be bias incident discrimination. And so, if there is any sort of confusion that ever does happen, we always encourage folks to listen. If you may not have the quickest time to assess the issue, then call 911, right? Especially if there's something intense going on. And so let's go on to the next one here. So what is it that you do if you experience or witness a hate crime, right? And so we talked about calling 911 for immediate assistance. We've worked with the 911 dispatching system for those folks who don't necessarily speak, who don't speak English or want language assistance. That if they were to name the language that they end up stating at the top of the call, then that would be something the 911 operator would automatically connect them to a translator. And the translator would provide interpretation services. If folks don't feel comfortable, calling 911, they can file a police report by reaching out directly to a precinct, local precinct, to an officer that they may know. If folks would prefer to go, outside of the NYPD, then they can actually go directly to a DA's office to be able to also provide that information, to be able to let them know, and they can conduct that investigation. And at the same time, I've worked with victims and survivors who've also said, listen, I don't want to engage with government, I just want services. And so we provide an information, a list of services where you can contact a community organization or an advocate who would end up providing that there is resources and services provided. I do want to echo this. You don't need a police report to get victim services in New York. You can go directly to one of the community organizations that I'll provide information on later on to be able to get resources and services as needed. So this goes into sort of our New York City victim advocacy. These are the folks who would be one of the groups that would be, these are government entities, of course. I'll go into more detail about who they are, but who a victim or a survivor might interact with, right? And so when a crime is reported, the Crime Victim Assistance Program, these are CVAP, they're advocates or victim advocates who work at each precinct, and then who end up being the bridge between the victim as a survivor and the department in, for example, filing a police report, providing assistance and services and resources that are available, informing victims of their rights, ensuring that there's eligibility for victim compensation or what victim compensation they're eligible for, right? And so in this situation, some folks prefer to just go directly to CVAP and not go through NYPD, and that's okay as well. And I'll provide that information shortly on that as well. Victim services and victim aid unit. Each of the DA's offices have victim advocates that provide service related to crisis counseling, safety planning, if you need to be chaperoned to court. And they have their own list of organizations that provide services as well. Some of them overlap with ours. And they can also provide assistance for applicants to get financial and medical bill reimbursement from the New York State Office of Victim Services as well. And so this is sort of the various entry points that folks can get access to city resources and services. So I just want to put this up here. Thrive NYC is the crime victim, the CVAP program, right? The Crime Victim Advocacy Program. So the number, if someone were to want a resource, they could call that number directly, the victims of crime and their families, and you don't necessarily have to go to PD on that too. NYC Well is an initiative that's been started. Of course, there are mental health issues that come from hate crimes, right? And this is something that's impacts, of course, and can impact the individual who's been affected directly or the overall community. So we encourage folks to also reach out to NYC Well for for that assistance as well. When it comes to discrimination on bias reports, 311 or call say human rights. And then the last two are focused on immigration legal assistance for folks and the family justice centers. Although the family justice centers do work on domestic and gender-based violence, their service providers also do provide hate crime services as well at times, and they overlap quite a bit, so we get to work with them. And so folks at even the FJCs are pretty much, the family justice centers in each borough are pretty much up to date on what services are available for folks who are victims of hate crimes. And so now we get into, before I get into this, we've seen a tremendous, an increase in anti-Asian or hate crimes against AAPI communities. And our city has been committed to ensuring that we're addressing this issue in an ongoing way. So we engage on a weekly basis with elected officials and community leader organizations to be able to provide them with briefing on resources, services, and events that we are currently working on, right? And so one of the things that we collectively as our agencies came together and said, let's put a resource together, was we put together a Stop Asian Hate Toolkit that provides tremendous amounts of information, all the way from resources and services that are available to what people can do, what we can do as New Yorkers to ensure the safety of our community. So I'm gonna put that in the chat. Can I do that, if you don't mind? And then I'll go into.
Sure, you can send it to me and I can put it into the chat. This is Max.
Okay, so I will. The chat box. Oh, there it is. I'm like, the chat box disappeared. Okay, there you go. And so now we get to these be an upstander. A lot of the incidents that we've seen in the last few weeks and months and through the course of my experience, are done in public, right? They're done in broad daylight. They're done at night sometimes around folks. And we've seen situations where there's been a crowd, there's been a recording that folks have been taking through the course of that. And so what is it that we as New Yorkers can do to be able to ensure the safety of our neighbors, of our communities that are here, right? What makes our city amazing is our diversity, right? And so how do we ensure that we're protecting that? And so in this is an organization called Hollaback. I have to give them the utmost credit for doing phenomenal training around this area. And they, provide this information for folks on what we can do if we see something happen. And so if we see an incident taking place, I think the first and foremost thing is to ensure that that we're ensuring our own safety before we engage in these 5 Ds, right? So is it possible, 1, for us to be able to do this? 2, is it safe for us to do this? And 3, which one do I do this to ensure that we can provide assistance to that person? So the first D is delegate. It's, of course, scan a situation to assess the risk and determine how to best intervene and delegate tasks, right? That could be literally like, hey, can you go tell the trained person about this while I do this, or get in that way, to be able to ensure that there is a response that's taking place. It does involve a bit of leadership and courage to be able to put out there and say, like, I'm going to start delegating this to folks to be able to ensure that this situation that happens can start de-escalating, right? And this, of course, is a non-law enforcement strategy, right? This may also be where you're not necessarily involved in the incident, but you're delegating and you're giving yourself a task, you're giving someone else a task to be able to ensure that this comes to the attention of someone so it can be de-escalated as soon as possible, right? Distract attention away from the person causing harm, the survivor, or the situation itself. This could be literally standing, trying to grab the attention of the victim or survivor, or the individual who's causing the incident itself, right? Of course, you want to be aware of your safety in that. It could be delay. It could be that the issue itself is something that was along the lines of a bias incident, and maybe you felt uncomfortable engaging in the first 2, but you decided, well, I'll go and delay, and I'm going to check in with the survivor afterward, right? And so some of the information that we have in the resources and services there in the Stop Asian hate toolkit are things that could potentially be utilized, right, on that. Document, and this is something that, you know, if a person's in crisis, to document the situation by recording on your phone or writing notes. Of course, you want to be extremely careful and sensitive in how you do this, because you don't know how the individual is going to react if done so, right? But being able to ensure that there is information, that there is some sort of documentation in it, ensures that an investigation or the incident itself is something that the police or law enforcement or whoever is involved in looking at the situation can ensure is looked at. And of course, there's direct. Respond directly to the aggressor or physically intervene if necessary, and only after assessing the situation and its risk. Be as confident, assertive, and calm, right? And of course, throughout all this, it's important to self-reflect and self-aware in terms of whether this is something you can intervene on and how do you want to intervene on this. We want to be able to make this city one city that collectively advocates, unites, stands for each other, right? And especially if we're going through a really critical time right now where AAPI communities are under attack, right, in New York City, but also across the country. So what is it that we can do to be able to ensure safety in those sort of instances? And these 5 Ds are one way to do so. Oh, okay, and that pretty much concludes the training overall. I really appreciate the time that folks have given to me, and I look forward to hearing some questions from people as well, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Wow.
And you know, we have our email over there, ophc@cityhall.nyc.gov. Feel free to email if you have any questions, any resources, or whatever it might be. We are more than happy, and that email is actually like legitimately checked by a real person. So it is me.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
I do have one question.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. Sorry. Just if folks go directly to CVAP and don't file a police report, is that incident still going to be captured in the statistics?
No, because NYPD would have to be, it would be the survivor and the victim's decision of whether they want to report it as a hate crime to the police department. The police department is the entity that ends up capturing that information.
Okay, so it's not tracked in some other way. The statistics are the complaint statistics.
But the way it works is because my office we also track data at the level of what you're talking about, like service provision provided to folks. We also work with those community organizations that collect their own hate crime data. They have their own hate crime hotlines that we also engage with to be able to get a better idea of what the issue of where these things are trending, right? So whatever factor, we want to be able to get the depth of the issue itself. So an example is the Anti-Violence Project has a hotline. It's an LGBTQ organization. And they have a hotline that collects hate crime data. And what's very interesting about that is, you know, of course you want to respect the information that they have and the data that they have. You know, of course, an individual would be calling a community hotline if they didn't feel comfortable calling a government hotline, right? So getting that information from community organizations in a way where there is some, you know, they provide for confidentiality is helpful for us to be able to also understand what, you know, precincts or what, you know, what is it called, what borough or whatever it might be, for us to be able to ensure that our response is also meeting those communities' needs as well too.
Okay.
There's so much data in the world of hate crimes. I mean, but at the same time, I can tell you now that when I led my organization in DC, the data that we had in terms of where incidents were happening slightly differ from the police department. And obviously it's because the folks who are going to report in either areas were coming from different sorts of positions, right? And the folks that were reporting to my hotline, for example, were folks that were undocumented, folks that were sex workers, folks that didn't feel comfortable going to the police department or whatever it might be. So, you know, they would end up reporting it to us and we would ensure provision of service. That's my past position, FYI. Right now, if a community organization does reach out to me, which they have in the past with certain circumstances, we will also connect them to resources and services. We want to be able to meet the victim and the survivor's needs in that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. This presentation was very informative. I'm sure everyone received some great information, even just to learn, the differences between hate crimes as well as bias incidents. I'll ask a question just to get it started. And please raise your hands if you have any questions, those that are attending. So with the hate crimes and the bias incidents, have there ever been any situations that a bias incident was labeled a bias incident, but then it actually was a hate crime because maybe more information, of course, would come out to elevate it, or would it just stay, because I know there's a little line in between it. I come from law enforcement a little bit, so I know there's little variants that it can happen. And how does that work?
So there are times in which there is a concurrent investigation going on by both agencies that would handle the bias incident factor as well as the hate crime factor. And the determination really depends on what the investigation itself ends up, the findings are by the investigators, by the respective agency, law enforcement agencies. But there are times where there are concurrent investigations going on. And does that mean that both can apply in that situation? Possibly.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sorry, is it Hassan or Hassan?
It's Hassan, but Hassan. Actually, both are fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, with the spate of anti-Asian hate crimes, a response that I've heard from some folks, not all folks, but some folks in the Asian community, is the desire to call for more law enforcement action or to create heavier penalties. And for me personally, I think that historically hate crime laws hate crime laws have been have been disproportionately used against Black and Brown communities than they have in instances where the person committing the hate crime is white. And so I'm hesitant to go the direction of how do we talk to communities? And I also don't believe that heavier laws deter hate or fix the root cause of hate. And so how do we explain to communities who are feeling vulnerable that that there are other solutions beyond more law enforcement?
Very good point. And I just want to say that the reason why our office was created was to really work towards a non-law enforcement sort of stance, right? And the work that MOCJ, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, has generally done has been working towards really a decarceration overall, right? Because it is so important for us to be able to work towards the larger criminal justice reform movement. And a lot of us being able to try to explain that really involves us having those conversations in the community advisory services team. I mean, we have folks that are coming in from backgrounds who and communities and political perspectives where they haven't been exposed to the potential of things that one could do outside of the criminal justice system, right, to be able to seek to address these issues, right? And so just in us having the conversation and doing so, right, and explaining and providing those examples has been something that's been we've been able to move people to pursue a restorative justice outcome on this stuff, right? But I think the more exposure that we give to folks that these options exist, as well as us really pushing for these. And I strongly believe that the best way for us to work towards addressing hate crimes or stopping hate crimes or be able to be as effective as possible, of course, is for us to be able to engage with communities who are committed and work with communities to be able to ensure that we're working on putting a safety model together that doesn't necessarily have to involve law enforcement, right? And so early on, we have something in the city called the CMS system that works on gun violence prevention, right? It's like the crisis management system. After a particular shooting or entity happens, they dispatch a number of resources and services into that community to be able to ensure that one, there won't be a retaliatory, shooting, and that whatever resources and services are needed in that area, all the way from like ensuring, that the DYCD programs are running there, that folks have, whatever it might be, that has shown and proven that we've seen a decrease in gun violence in the city, right? And so I've seen the model of communities coming together and standing with communities and working with each other to be able to seek to address the larger aspect of hate actually have an effect. We took a Hasidic rabbi, very committed to stopping hate, and he went into various schools throughout Brooklyn to be able to talk about his community as well as his experiences, to really build a bridge between a lot of the local communities there, as well as the Hasidic community, right? And so these are various things that, although we see, they happen once or twice and we want to be able to sustain them, they really do end up having the impact of really building a relationship that does, especially among leaders, that has an effect on their communities overall, right? And so I think that, as our office was created, our city anteed up its commitment to ensure that we're going to look at non-criminal justice responses. And the mayor today just announced that we're putting even more resources and funding into Asian AAPI community organizations, Jewish community organizations, as well as Latinx ones, Black. I think it's some $3 million that's going to it, just announced today, to ensure that we can actually build capacity more on that, on response that doesn't end up having to be laid into a criminal justice system or legal system. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, she fell off, but she's back on.
So Andrea, if I can quick hop in, I just want to remind everyone that you can participate if you do want to ask a question by going to the reactions icon towards the bottom of your screen for most of you and pressing the raise hand button.
Thank you. Yes, you answered it. She's back on. I think she's having internet issues. Sarah. Okay, she's back.
That we do have a working group that's dedicated to restorative justice within the interagency committee. It's currently, we've done an environmental scan. We're really trying to systemize, or even I would say we're trying to make it a culture in the city, right? Where we're working toward restorative justice, right? And so we're working towards it in every possible situation. And so that is something that the working group came together last year, and it's still sort of in progress. And so we hope to see recommendations come from it that would end up informing what restorative justice programming would look like in the city down the line on hate crimes and bias incidents.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have another question. Recalling the 3 pillars approach that you all have, what is the youngest age that your the education part can come forth? Like, what is the youngest age that you all can come, teach, educate?
Well, so far, the work that we've done has been around middle schoolers and high schoolers, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't go down to elementary school and even early education. I think that's going to be the next venture. As we look to our youth education working group, we're hoping to expand that down the line. What happened in Brooklyn a while back, there were some threats that were put at Brooklyn, at a high school in Brooklyn, against Black communities on a locker there. And so, the best way for us to be able to respond to that was, of course, engaging in, restorative justice principles, healing circles and stuff. And that was very powerful, because what we found was, what had happened was unfortunate, but there were larger trending issues that just weren't being addressed, that of course would lead to such outcomes like that. And so students got to sit down in this circle. And of course we have to be mindful, I can't be in that circle, we have to make it student centered. We have to find a right facilitator for it as well, right? And ensure that it's meeting the needs of those students as well. But that's been our programming, as well as middle school students. But I think that obviously down the line, we want to go towards younger. And our hate crime curriculum, the hope of that is that some of it would be utilized in youth education for younger folks.
Okay, thank you. That's good. That's good. We have a question from Wendy.
Go ahead, Wendy. Just click to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Wendy.
Hi. Mr. Naveed, that was a wonderful presentation. It was very thoughtful, and in fact, it provoked a bunch of questions. So thank you very much. I'm wondering, my two questions are kind of related. I'm wondering if statistically there are more attacks of people on the street, or when they're cornered, perhaps in their stores or in a remote cornered area. And the reason that I'm asking was I was thinking about how we can raise community awareness in CB8. And part of an education program might be to have posters in stores. And when my kids were little, we used to have stores that had safe haven signs in them for if they felt they were being followed. And I wonder if that kind of approach would work. It would probably not work if the store owners themselves were under attack. So there's a limit to what I'm saying. So that's kind of part one. And if there are attacks, if there's a difference in the attacks by neighborhood or area, I'd be interested to know those statistics to the extent that you might know them. And that leads me to my second question in terms of awareness. And I don't know that your office can do this, but in terms of community outreach, there's the idea of posters in stores, and we have, banks and post offices as well, but also there, YouTube ads and Facebook ads. Facebook ads are really cheap, and you can target communities. I mean, it doesn't have to be all over the world. It can just be by zip code or where you want to send out a particular message. So is that initiative also being taken, and especially vis-a-vis where do you go if you think you're about to be under attack and you need help? And thank you very much in advance.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. So I was going to say that very good questions. I'll address the second one first, which is about pretty much looking towards a media campaign. With the announcement that, the mayor sort of slightly made today by releasing the budget, we are looking at putting together a media campaign down the line that would end up putting those sorts of advertisements on social media and other sort of spaces, right? And so that is something that we're excited, that was, pushed through. We're excited to be able to bring in a firm to do that. And then on the posters and sort of the building awareness or raising awareness in the community itself to more physical, because what we're noticing with some of these hate crimes is they tend to happen, of course, in public spaces, right? They tend to be something that happen as someone's walking, right? And so we have posters, and I'm happy to share them with you all in multiple languages that many businesses and also communities that we've gone to, we've flyered out there in some of the businesses. So I'll give you an example. We've had, the hate crime incidents in Flushing, for example, right? And so we've gone to businesses in Flushing and Jackson Heights and other areas that are considered these sorts of hotspots, or we've even led out information to community organizations to go post those posters in various languages. And I'm happy to be able to provide that information for you. Another thing, Wendy, like beautifully said, like, building a network of businesses, right? There is something that's amazing about the South Bronx and sort of addressing the issues of community tension, of crime, is that they've put together a network of just a phone tree between businesses, NYCHA development leaders, faith leaders, to be able to ensure that they are managing something along the lines of safety, right? And that says a lot about how these communities have all come together to be able to do that. It was a grassroots initiative, right? And so we're obviously happy to support those endeavors as well too. But it was something that was carried out. And so I'll share the posters for folks to be able to put up if you want to. We should have more materials coming soon to be able to have folks to put out there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, cause.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, with so much money being spent, so much education, so much outreach, so much resource, why is hate crime increasing? And would it be better to have more, I hate to use the term more boots on the ground, but more local communities taking care of it, rather than, we can educate, or can we over-educate? And then by that time, nobody really pays attention.
Mm-hmm. A good question. So I would just say that there hasn't really been a lot of money put towards hate crime prevention and response on the non-law enforcement side. This is a relatively we're one of the first offices of its kind that's been created, right? There isn't offices like us that exist in other cities. There have been ones that are looking to model like our office, but we are one of the first of its kind that's actually committing itself to something outside of the law enforcement apparatus, right? And we're doing so by engaging with communities directly. And all the flyering that I was talking about earlier, I love your point, Klaus, about the boots on the ground. We have the boots on the ground, and this was in the last year, I'll say, because we're only about 19 months old, right? We've managed to actually go out there and have those boots on the ground with those community organizations, showing solidarity with ally organizations as well, too. I mean, just imagine just a nice, diverse crowd going together to be able to flyer and to be able to show support for communities. The most powerful way to be able to combat hate, of course, is education, but it's also to be able to show unity and allyship among communities overall, to be able to say, look, we are here together to be able to oppose this. And so this is some of the efforts that we are obviously working towards doing, right? The money that was announced today is an important, it's only $3 million, right? But I want to just sort of back up and say that, the city did initially, council put money forward for hate crime prevention work, but then because of the pandemic, the money was pulled. And so, there was a situation where we were operating without any money, right? Any resources. We're operating with city resources, but still doing our job to the best extent that we can. And we're blessed now to be able to have those resources, but also a lot of that money is going to community organizations. I just want to put $2.4 million going to community organizations, those that specifically work on the ground on these issues, right? And those that can also put boots on the ground as well, too, right? So when we're talking, there's a potential, there's money being given to an AAPI community organization there, right? And there's been talks about creating a chaperone service for Asian seniors to go, to get vaccinated, right? And so that is something that the money could be utilized for, but we really want to end up working with these community organizations to determine what the needs are and how to address those needs. So we're not wasting money, but we're ensuring that we're maximizing it as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to hear the work you all are doing in the South Bronx with community organizations, faith-based organizations, and or leaders in NYCHA. So I'm born and raised in the South Bronx. So this is good to know. Yeah. What area is there? A Pacific area you all are working in?
So I'm a part of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and so they have their Mayor's Action Plan and then their Office for Neighborhood Safety, and they're working with the NYCHA developments in the South Bronx. And so they've been working, I forget what they call it, SOBRO. I guess the New York Times dubbed it SOBRO, but that area itself is something that they've worked on. But our efforts and their efforts, we all work in conjunction with each other, right? Because there's a connection here. And so whatever our CMS providers like SOS or, these are various organizations, Save Our Streets, whatever it might be, are doing, right? They're also complementing our efforts, and we're also working with them to ensure that that's happening. Now, the venture I talked to you about in the South Bronx, the amazing sort of phone tree, the network stuff, that was entirely grassroots. And there was not really any government involvement there because they realized they needed to be able to address the issue ASAP, right? And a lot of it was because some of the bodegas in the areas were complaining, were calling 911 over and over on anyone and everyone, right? And that was an issue. How could we look towards trying to prevent that and just look towards community solutions, right? And so that was something that was achieved in that area.
It's good to know and hear. Okay. And you also spoke about a rollout of possibly like the video, some videos and some information like that. I don't know if you remember, I don't know if you would, you might remember or heard of it. Remember we had years ago, at least in my era, just like Schoolhouse Rock, and they gave us educational videos. Would you all be able to create something like that for the youth? Possibly.
So where we're at is we're creating that hate crime curriculum, and I just want to. It's going to be interactive, and it's going to be, I say this. It's going to be fun. We're trying to make it like as engaging as possible and mindful of our audience, and so we're going into tremendous effort to provide that. So I think that those aspects of videos, testimonials, of information is going to come from that curriculum itself. That's going to be informative for folks. But I hope down the line one day, if anybody has a Schoolhouse Rock connection, let's make that happen, right? I mean, I think it would be interesting that we to be able to have that sort of stuff. But that educational curriculum material is going to go to a lot of the public school students in the city as well.
Okay, yeah, that's good. It's in my head. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill, right? All of that stuff. It was a lot of fun. See, everybody's chuckling that remembers it. Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. Any more questions while we still have our guest here? No? Okay.
Well, thank you all so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to folks and also to share a little bit about the work that we're doing. I'm going to put my personal email in the chat, or I'll send it to Will, and then Will will send it. We'll put it out in the chat, just so folks, if they want to reach out directly on particular things, I'm happy to also, my personal City Hall email, but happy to engage with folks. Okay.
Thank you.
Will your presentation be available, or can we find aspects of it online?
You can find aspects of it online. We're going to update it as well a little bit. So I think that are there particular areas, if you're interested in, I'm happy to share the information or the sources there. I like the 5 Ds, for example, the upstander training. I like that slide is okay, but I would rather give you something that's a little bit more illustrative and that's amazing that the city's done in the past. So I'm happy to be able to share that with you. And also to add in some of our partners, the Asian American Federation, other organizations that are there have produced amazing resources and materials. And I also would like to, share that. So if there are particular aspects of our presentation, I'm happy to be able to pull information for that too as well. It'll be a lot more informative than just the slides itself.
Okay, great. So we'll stay in touch by email to get those resources. Thank you.
Absolutely. And my email should now be, thank you, Max, for putting that. It should be in the chat box now.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I will let you all continue with your meeting. I think is that, or am I done?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Okay. That was great. That was great. I guess we jump into any old business. No old business, right? Any new business? Motion to adjourn? I don't know. Everybody's quiet tonight, so I see Russell. Russell's motioning to adjourn. Can we get a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining our meeting in this presentation, and it was really informative, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Good night.